for the next keynote, I invite Heather Conley, the president of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. It is the first time she's here with us at the Aspen GMF Bucharest Forum, and we are really grateful to have her.
Well, thank you so much. What a privilege to be here, and what an impossible task to come after Mircea Joanna and those remarkable comments. What a perfectly titled conference. Global inflection point, where are we headed? I heard the same question mark in President Biden's address to the American people on October the 19th, where he said to the American people, we are facing an inflection point in history. As I was preparing for my remarks this morning, I thought back, what did the world look like 12 years ago when this important forum was started? So I'll take the 2011-2012 period. What was happening? The Arab awakening was happening. Great turmoil in Egypt. The dramatic 9.0 earthquake in Japan, which created the Fukushima crisis. Osama bin Laden was killed. The Iraq War ended. At the end of 2010, the United States and Russia and the United States had ratified the New START Treaty. And of course, at the end of 2011 and 2012, we saw the largest demonstrations in Russia, and which again heralded the return of President Vladimir Putin to the Kremlin. And just 1 year later, in 2013, Xi Jinping arrived as leader of the Chinese Communist Party. That was a monumentous period. And I think hindsight, looking back, which is always perfect vision, we missed it. We missed great power competition as it was beginning to form over 12 years ago. We recognized it in the United States in 2017 with our national security strategy, but it was very difficult. And in many ways, we are at another important moment of understanding a significant shift in the international system. So the reason I speak to you today with some confidence is the German Marshall Fund knows a little bit about inflection points. In fact, we were created as a living memorial to an inflection point in the 21st century. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to go back a second in history, because we're celebrating some very important anniversaries. Last year, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. This year, it was recognizing the 75th anniversary of the Berlin airlift. And of course, next year, we are absolutely enthusiastic of hosting the NATO summit in Washington to honor the 75th anniversary of NATO. So let's step back for a moment and think about that historic period. Because it wasn't predestined that the United States would invest in Europe 2 years after the Second World War. It wasn't predestined that the United States and its allies would have an extraordinary military delivery of humanitarian aid to Berlin to break the blockade. And there was nothing inevitable about 12 countries coming together to seek greater security. But that's exactly what they did. So in 1947, when the United States, George Marshall, announced the Marshall Plan, inflation was high and the American people had done their part for Europe. There was no interest and enthusiasm in investing, yet we understood the strategic imperative. It took a Democratic president and a Republican Congress to convince the American people this was our interest. And in some ways, I take that inflection point in the 20th century, and I want to tell you this is our generation's inflection point. We have to meet this moment. And of course, on top of the geostrategic imperative that this moment presents, it's intensified by the climate crisis. So this is our generation facing the largest land war in Europe. Now, a potential of a Middle East conflict that could have regional implications, heightened tensions in the Indo-Pacific. We see an increasing connection between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So I offer a reflection by former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates in Foreign Affairs. This was his first sentence of his article. The United States now confronts graver threats to its security than it has in decades, perhaps ever. Never has it faced 4 allied antagonists at the same time: Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, whose collective nuclear arsenal could within a few years be nearly double the size of its own. Not since the Korean War has the United States had to contend with powerful military rivals in both Europe and in Asia. So this is our inflection moment, our generation. How will we decide to navigate it? I have some suggestions on how to successfully navigate it, and I hope it's something that we'll talk about throughout the next 2 days of the forum. I believe we successfully navigate this moment with 3 important mindsets. Number 1, we have to have a builder's mindset. What future do we want to build? This is how GMF is approaching a modern Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Ukraine is the greatest rebuild project of my lifetime, and I want in on it. It is difficult, yes. Is it impossible? No. Just ask our forefathers when they were working on the Marshall Plan. Have a builder's mindset. Second, invest deeply in partners and allies. Europe is investing in the United States. The United States must invest in Europe. This is how we strengthen ourselves. Sometimes we become a little too competitive, and sometimes we have to think turning that competition and strengthening ourselves. And the third guide, we must have a winning mindset. Incrementalism and muddling through and seeking only stability is insufficient for an inflection point. We must be bold. We must build. We must invest. So, I want to leave you with a few questions as you begin your conversations. With those guidelines of building, investing, and winning, today the West lacks an overarching strategy for what winning looks like in Ukraine. I know what winning looks like for Russia because I see it today. Attrition, fatigue, waiting us out, hoping perhaps for a change in leadership in Western companies. That cannot stand. I do see elements of a Western strategy that will win, but I see it without conviction. I see it now increasingly becoming distracted. Exactly as Mircea said, EU candidate status for Ukraine and for Moldova is bold, but it cannot be a path to nowhere. There has to be urgency in achieving EU membership. There has to be greater impetus on the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. And increasingly, I see where Indo-Pacific partners and European partners are deeply investing in Ukraine's security. But what I don't see is preparation for what Bob Gates calls this adversarial alignment against the West. And this is what concerns me. We have to connect these dots between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. We have to prepare ourselves for that before it is too late. We cannot argue about 2% of spending for investment. We have to speak only about implementing urgently our regional defense plans. We have to be urgent about rooting out adversarial influence in our own countries. We have to get very serious about our own economic competitiveness. I thought Mario Draghi's words yesterday were profoundly important. Our economic strength is equally important to the task of meeting this geopolitical moment. So, why do I look back to look forward? I think history can tell us a lot at this 75th anniversary series. The 1947 to 1949 moment is speaking to our generation today for this geopolitical moment. We must invest in our allies so we can prosper. That's our economic strength. We need that economic strength to protect our democracies, and we need to secure that prosperity and that democracy with security. That is the intersection that Mircea was talking about. Democracy, prosperity, security. Reread the preamble of the Washington Treaty that formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You will find those same words of what those founding countries wanted. So let's have a winning mindset. Let's invest in ourselves, and let's build the future, because it is bright despite the dark clouds that we see geopolitically. We can build again. Thank you very much.